All right, so today we go inside the psychology the music industry doesn't want you to understand. This episode, a documented psychological process that quietly strips a performer of who they actually were. Not a feeling, not a metaphor, a mechanism. It has a name. There's a documented process. Clinical, measurable, cold, over years, quietly, precisely, like a slow bleed. And by the time it's visible from the outside, it's been over for a long time. Turns out, the most dangerous thing in rock and roll isn't the drugs, it's the crowd. When a musician collapses publicly, the conversation goes straight to substance abuse, erratic behavior, early death. What that conversation almost deliberately misses is the mechanism underneath, the process by which a person builds a public identity and slowly loses access to the one that existed before. Not overnight, gradually, quietly, without anyone noticing, including them. That mechanism has a name. Now, when I found it and read the research behind it, I had to go back through every musician I'd ever studied and look at all of it differently. The ones who survived left evidence. The evidence is not what you'd expect. Identity foreclosure. Not a music industry cliche, not a metaphor, a documented failure mode in human psychological development. It happens when a person commits to an identity, a role, a version of themselves before the internal work that makes that identity real has been done. The identity is adopted, not built. The stage persona forms early, before the private self has any real structure. Thousands of people respond to it every night with an intensity the private self cannot compete with. The performing self gets fed. The private self gets nothing. In the field, this is called a developmental failure. In the room, it looks exactly like success. The performing self wins every time by default. Over time, the private self doesn't disappear, it atrophies. The performer becomes completely fluent on stage and increasingly foreign to themselves everywhere else. The stage is the only place the identity feels real, which creates one specific brutal problem when the stage gets taken away. Think about every musician you've ever watched disintegrate between albums, between tours, in the silence. Now you know why. So let's talk about what touring actually does to a human brain. Not the mythology, the biology. Sleep deprivation, not accidental, structural. Late shows, post-show adrenaline that won't let the brain power down, time zones that shred the body's internal clock. Months of this. Impaired emotional regulation, a compromised prefrontal cortex, the system that handles impulse control and long-term decisions, a threat response permanently stuck in fight or flight, a performer making career-defining identity choices while running a brain that hasn't slept properly in months. Isolation compounds it. You're surrounded by people, constantly and completely alone. Bandmates, crew, the same small group, airtight container, maximum pressure. Research on isolated high-stress groups documents exactly this pattern. Interpersonal friction escalates, emotional regulation collapses, and people lose the ability to accurately read their own mental state. A touring band is an expedition that never ends. Except on expeditions, they eventually send someone to bring you home. But on tour, show must go on. The post-performance crash, documented, measured, almost never discussed publicly. Performance triggers a full neurochemical event. Dopamine, adrenaline, cortisol, endorphins, thousands of people directing focused energy at one person simultaneously. That feeds directly into the performer's psychology. It's biological, it's measurable. And the crash lands in the worst possible conditions. Late night, post-adrenaline insomnia, total isolation, a performing self with no role to play until the next show. Research identifies this as the window of the highest psychological vulnerability for performing artists. It's also when the gap between the performing self and the private self is felt most sharply. The crowd went home. The person the crowd came to see went with them. What's left in that hotel room is whoever existed before all of this started. And for some performers, that person has become a stranger. Read enough of these case histories and you start recognizing the same 3 a.m. In 1902, someone put a name to what was happening: the looking glass self. The idea that human beings don't build identity from the inside out. They build it from the reflection, what they perceive others see when they look at them. The performers with massive audiences that Mirror is enormous, consistent, overwhelmingly positive, but only toward the performing self. The audience sees the stage persona, responds with total reinforcement. The performer's entire sense of self organizes around that reflection. As the audience's image of the performer becomes more fixed, the performer's ability to see themselves outside of it deteriorates. Any private experience that doesn't match the public image, doubt, ordinariness, the quiet sadness that has no dramatic quality, registers as deviation from self, no expression of it. The performer becomes a stranger to their own interior life. Not because they're broken, but because the mirror got too big and it only reflects one version. You know, I used to think that musicians who lost themselves were weak, that they made choices and then they paid the price for it. The research says something different. It says the loss of self is not a character flaw, it is a structural outcome. When the reflection becomes the only source of identity, the private self doesn't just atrophy. It goes looking for something real to hold on to. And what it finds in the search varies. Some find destruction. Some find silence. Some find something else entirely. What I know is this: identity built entirely on the crowd's reflection is not identity. It's a performance of one. Coming from someone currently performing on an episode about performing. I'll let you sit with that. And eventually, every performance ends. The question is, what's standing there when the lights go out? Subscribe and like. Learn hard. Live loud. I'll see you in the next one. Why is it as soon as I hit record, a massive amount of noise starts happening? It was actually relatively quiet before I pressed record, and now there's an airplane, there's people running around screaming, and there's construction going on. I don't like the public. Just kidding.